Every month, families across the world throw away money, literally. Overpriced groceries, spoiled food, wasted leftovers. We live in a world where feeding a whole family feels like a strategic battle. But what if the solution to this modern mess was buried 2,000 years in the past? The ancient Romans, with no fridges, no apps, and no whole foods, figured out how to eat like kings while spending like peasants. And the wild part? Their methods still work. Back then, most people weren't emperors or nobles. They were commoners, farmers, laborers, market sellers, just trying to get by. Food wasn't guaranteed, and wasting it was almost a sin. So they were eating smart, like really smart, nutrient-dense, low-cost, zero waste. Romans turned their kitchens into battlegrounds for survival, and every scrap mattered. Their whole cooking philosophy revolved around stretching ingredients, preserving food naturally, and turning even the humblest of meals into something hearty and satisfying. Start with the basics: wheat, barley, lentils, and chickpeas. These were cheap, long-lasting, and super filling. One of their go-to dishes was pulse, a thick porridge made from grains. Think oatmeal, but heartier and way more versatile. Add herbs, a drizzle of oil, maybe a few chopped veggies or scraps of meat, and boom, you've got a full meal that could feed a whole family for pennies. Now compare that to today's $3 microwave meals, loaded with sodium, wrapped in plastic, and somehow still leave you hungry an hour later. And what about protein? Meat was expensive then, just like it is now. But Romans didn't stress. Instead of spending heavily on daily meat, they turned to lentils and chickpeas, both rich in protein and dirt cheap. They also knew how to make meat go a long way. A single piece could be roasted one day, then chopped into a stew, shredded into a filling, or simmered into broth for the rest of the week. Nothing went to waste. Meat wasn't the center of the meal. It was a flavor boost. Now here's where things get next level. Without freezers or refrigeration, how did they keep their food from spoiling? The answer lies in their natural preservation techniques. Methods so effective, they're still used today in certain parts of the world. Salting and curing were essential. Meats and fish were rubbed with salt or soaked in brine, which killed bacteria and kept them edible for months. Not only did this stop spoilage, but it also made the food taste better. That's why cured meats like salted pork and fermented fish sauce, called garum, were Roman staples. Fruits and vegetables? They had that covered too. Drying and smoking were the go-to techniques. Dried fruits and herbs could last months, and smoking meats added both flavor and shelf life. They also pickled like pros, submerging veggies in oil or vinegar to keep them fresh for up to 4 years. Let that sink in. 4 years. Meanwhile, we toss out half a cucumber if it gets a little soft after 3 days. And the scraps. Oh, the glorious scraps. What do you do with carrot peels, bread crusts, or a half-eaten chicken wing? If you're like most people today, you probably toss it. But the Romans saw potential. Vegetable peels went into soups, bone-flavored broths, stale bread turned into crunchy croutons, or even dessert puddings. They lived by the rule: if it's edible, it's useful. That kind of thinking could easily save families hundreds a year and slash landfill waste. But it wasn't just about what they cooked, it was also how. Today, we drop serious cash on cooking. Gas, electricity, kitchen gadgets. Ovens can pull 5 kilowatt hours every time you preheat, and gas burners eat up thousands of BTUs. But the Romans, they made one-pot meals, grains, veggies, meat scraps, all in a single clay pot. Less cleanup, less firewood, less fuss. It was a heat-retaining clay pot that worked like a slow cooker before electricity even existed. These clay vessels, once heated, could retain warmth for hours, slowly cooking whatever was inside even after the fire was long gone. Toss in your ingredients, seal it up, and boom, dinner was basically cooking itself while they went on with their day. They didn't need timers or thermostats. They trusted the natural properties of clay and residual heat, and they could cook everything in these pots, grains, stews, roasted veggies, even meats. One pot. No fuss, maximum flavor. Here's where it gets even crazier. The Romans mastered multi-purpose oven cooking before meal prep became a thing. Today, you preheat your oven like 6 times for different meals. They had a sequence that squeezed every ounce of heat from one fire. Step 1. Bake bread. Gotta get that rising done while the oven's at peak heat. Step 2. Roast meat while the heat is still strong. Step 3. Let stews or beans simmer in the dying warmth. No fire needed. You see what just happened? 1 fire, 3 meals cooked. That's not just saving time. That's saving energy, firewood, and money. They even practiced residual heat cooking, letting hot ovens slowly finish meals overnight, using no extra energy. And get this, they had communal ovens. Whole neighborhoods baked together, saving fuel and time. Sure, you might not share your oven with Karen from next door today, but you can definitely cook in bulk and use residual heat smarter. And then there's the flavor game. We've been tricked into thinking that tasty food needs to come from imported spices, truffle oil, or sauces that cost $12 a bottle. But Romans knew better. They relied on fermentation and wild herbs. Their garum sauce, made from fermented fish, was rich in umami and sprinkled on everything from meats to desserts. It sounds weird, but it was like their version of soy sauce, powerful, punchy, and cheap to make. They also used thyme, oregano, vinegar, and foraged greens to pack serious flavor without burning holes in their wallets. Fast forward to today, food prices are rising and everyone's trying to cut corners. But the smartest move might be looking backward, cooking in bulk, repurposing leftovers, using long-lasting staples, fermenting and pickling, turning scraps into meals. It all adds up, not just in money saved, but in time, energy, and peace of mind. And time really is money. So why are we still wasting hours every day making separate meals? Romans cooked ahead. Romans really understood that efficiency wasn't about laziness, it was about survival. Now here's an interesting statistic. The average American spends around $500 a month on groceries. That's about 12% of their income. And where does a lot of that money go? Out of season produce, overpriced snacks, and energy-hungry cooking habits. The Romans dodged all of that by eating seasonally and locally. They bought what was available when it was cheapest. They grew herbs in kitchen gardens. They dried fruits for winter and pickled veggies in fall. They prepped, planned, and stored like champs. That's why they didn't panic when food got scarce. They were ready. Today, we swipe cards and scroll apps, assuming convenience equals better. But in reality, we're bleeding money. The Romans, without Google, without grocery stores, without even a refrigerator, figured out how to feed entire households with strategy, not spending. So maybe it's time to ask yourself, are you really saving time and money the way you think you are? Or are you stuck in a system that keeps you overspending and wasting more than you realize? At a time when modern families grapple with rising grocery bills, particularly for meat and dairy, the ancient Romans had already developed an ingenious, resourceful approach to cooking. Let's begin with one of the most expensive staples on today's grocery list: meat. The average American household spends over $1,000 a year on it. And with prices climbing steadily, many are faced with a simple choice: buy less or use it more efficiently. The Romans chose efficiency. One of their most brilliant adaptations was the use of minced meat dishes. Take Icitia aumentata, for instance, a lesser-known Roman delicacy that's essentially the ancestor of the modern meatball, but far more sophisticated in its construction. Instead of relying solely on meat, they blended it with grains, herbs, spices, and sometimes even crushed nuts. The result? A dish that extended precious protein across more portions, added texture and complexity, and didn't sacrifice satisfaction. Less meat, more meal, and absolutely no waste. And let's not ignore the economic sleight of hand here. By blending ingredients, they weren't just adding bulk, they were cutting costs. No more paying a premium for 100% ground beef. They used barley, chickpeas, or spelt to thicken it up and make each portion go further. Add herbs and boom, dinner tasted fancy without the fancy price. As for the tougher, less expensive cuts of meat that are often overlooked today, the Romans saw not waste, but potential. Rather than attempting to grill them into submission, they applied patience and technique, braising these cuts slowly over low heat until the fibers softened into something tender and deeply flavorful. And if that wasn't rich enough, they'd throw in garum, their go-to fermented fish sauce, or hearty bone broths to bring deep savor to the table. Let's move on to dairy. $4 for a gallon of milk, cheese that's about $10 per pound. And to make it worse, most of these dairy products come loaded with preservatives and have a short shelf life too. So how did the Romans do it? They made their own cheese. No factory, no preservatives, just milk, vinegar, or rennet, and patience. The process? Easy. You mix, let it curdle, strain the whey, and what you get is fresh, preservative-free cheese that lasts longer than milk and tastes 10 times better. They didn't stop there. Romans also fermented milk into a thick, probiotic-rich drink, kind of like an early version of yogurt or kefir. It had the same nutrients, kept longer, and actually helped your gut. When it came to cooking fats, butter was considered a rare and costly indulgence. Instead, olive oil took center stage. It was more affordable over time, shelf-stable, without refrigeration, and significantly healthier. But it wasn't just a substitute, it was essential. Romans used olive oil for frying, baking, dressing, and preserving. Now let's get into herbs and greens. But the Romans weren't about that overpriced grocery life. They foraged. They walked out, looked around, and saw wild herbs growing for free. Rosemary, thyme, fennel, mint, all growing like weeds but packed with health perks. They didn't just use them to season meals. They turned them into teas, tonics, even medicines. And the greens? They picked dandelions, chicory, purslane, plants we call weeds today, but are nutrient gold mines. These weren't side salads, they were full-blown meals. Add a drizzle of olive oil, maybe a sprinkle of cheese, and you've got a Roman dish that could rival any modern-day health bowl. Even flowers weren't off the menu. Violets and marigolds got thrown into dishes for color, taste, and health benefits. Now here's where most people tap out without even realizing it. Leftover pasta water. You boil noodles, drain the pot, and toss all that cloudy, starchy goodness down the drain. The Romans would have gasped. That's liquid gold you just wasted. Boil pasta just twice a week. You're throwing away 50 gallons a year of nutrient-rich water. That water is packed with starch that can thicken sauces, soups, and stews. The Romans knew that and repurposed it like pros. Grain, water. Same deal. It was used to cook veggies or make stews richer. Veggie water was reused to knead bread dough or added to broths, and bone broth water was reinforced with previous cooking water for an ultra-rich, gelatine-packed base. But wait, why did this matter? First, it was about stretching resources. Nothing went to waste. But more importantly, it made every dish taste better. That reused water carried nutrients from one dish into the next, layering flavor like a pro chef's secret weapon. Now, let's set aside cooking for a moment and turn to something equally intriguing: how the ancient Romans stored their money. Forget conventional piggy banks or dusty savings jars. These people approached personal finance with a fascinating level of creativity. One of the more ingenious methods? A small coin pouch strapped securely to the forearm. To access the coins, you had to unfasten the entire band. In some cases, the design was so secure that, short of removing the arm itself, your money wasn't going anywhere. And this wasn't spare change. The silver denarii tucked inside could buy serious luxuries: high-quality footwear, imported goods like olive oil, or even a night's lodging. In essence, the Romans built personal security into the very way they carried their wealth. Anyone attempting to rob you would need to go well beyond pickpocketing. It required genuine effort, and probably a few felony-level decisions. But not every Roman kept their money on their person. Some went the opposite route: bury it and hope for the best. Case in point, one particularly inventive individual decided that a copper bell made the perfect hiding place. He tucked 12 silver coins inside, sealed it up, and buried it near a well-traveled road, likely so he could find it again without too much trouble. This wasn't an impulsive move. Both the bell and the coins were rare, likely military issue, and valuable enough to warrant secrecy. In a way, it functioned like an early version of a safety deposit box, camouflaged as something completely ordinary. A security vault that could also ring. Genius or madman? Maybe both. One hoard discovered in Britain contained nearly 2,000 silver coins, carefully buried in a ceramic pot. This wasn't a thief's haul or battlefield loot. It was deliberate saving, a financial time capsule. To grasp the scale, 2,000 silver coins could fund a Roman soldier's annual salary. For a civilian, that was 3 years of steady wages for a craftsman, or 6 for an agricultural labourer. It could buy livestock, land, tools, or feed a household for seasons at a time. But what truly stands out is how it was organised. The coins weren't randomly tossed in. They were buried in chronological layers. The oldest coins sat at the bottom, with newer ones added on top over time. This wasn't a one-time panic stash, it was a practice. Someone was regularly topping up the pot, preserving their wealth incrementally, just like a modern savings account. Now here's where it gets especially intriguing. This particular hoard didn't just contain coins, it was packed with bronze vessels. And while that might sound like someone was simply burying old kitchenware, these weren't ordinary pots and pans. Among the items were elegant wine strainers, high-quality serving bowls, and ornate tableware. The kind of pieces that signaled wealth and status, even in their own time. Durable, decorative, and made from bronze. A material prized not just for its beauty, but also for its melt value. In fact, that's part of the tragedy. Much of the hoard was accidentally melted down, mistaken for scrap metal before its historical significance was understood. A painful loss, considering these artifacts were rare survivals of everyday Roman luxury. Objects designed not for display cases, but for living rooms, dining tables, and family rituals. Still, the items that did survive are now housed in museums, where they continue to impress modern eyes, just as they likely did centuries ago. And when you compare them to the forgotten odds and ends collecting dust in today's garages or attics, there's no contest. The Romans clearly had a better sense of what was worth keeping. And guess what? In 20 AD, something as ordinary and gross as urine was actually a hot commodity in ancient Rome. While today we just flush it away without a second thought, the Romans found multiple clever and practical uses for it. They used it to whiten their teeth, believe it or not. It was also a key ingredient in cleaning agents, working like an early version of detergent for washing clothes. On farms, it was applied to improve the quality of crops like pomegranates, and even in animal care, where it helped treat infections and diseases in livestock. What makes this even more surprising is that urine became so valuable that the Roman government taxed it. That's right, they didn't just use it, they made it a taxable product. If something gets taxed, it means it's part of a functioning economy. So yes, people were buying and selling pee, and the state wanted its cut of the profits. This shows how important and profitable it had become in day-to-day Roman life. The idea of someone starting a business selling urine might sound ridiculous now, but back then, it was a legitimate hustle. If you were smart and a little shameless, you could make money by collecting urine from public urinals or chamber pots and selling it to cleaners, tanners who processed leather, or even farmers. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And because people produced it daily for free, it was the ultimate renewable resource to base a business on. To get a deeper understanding of how realistic this business model could be, an expert on Roman history, Dr. Shane Bjornley, was consulted. While ancient Rome didn't exactly leave behind business plans or company ledgers for their pea entrepreneurs, historians like him agree that it's totally believable someone could build a full-on business around selling urine. It was practical, needed, and in demand. Add in the fact that the government bothered to regulate it with taxes, and it's clear this wasn't just some weird one-off, it was a whole micro-industry. So as odd as it may sound, ancient Rome's pea economy wasn't a joke. It was clever, profitable, and very real. Someone out there in a tunic probably made a living off liquid waste, proving once again that the Romans really didn't waste a single thing, not even what came out of them.